Before we begin, thank you for spending part of your day with me. Whether you're listening from home, at work, on a long drive, or before bed, I'm truly grateful you're here. Tonight's story is filled with betrayal, loyalty, dangerous secrets, and a love that begins with one impossible choice. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has reached. Now, let's begin today's unforgettable story. The Belladonna estate rose from the Tuscan hills like a monument to power itself. 300 years of Italian history carved into limestone walls. Security cameras hidden behind climbing roses. Luxury vehicles gleaming beneath chandeliers of moonlight. Armed bodyguards positioned at every entrance, every window, every shadow. Inside, a grand charity gala unfolded in the Great Hall. Politicians smiled with rehearsed warmth. Judges clinked glasses with men whose cases they would never hear. Business tycoons whispered deals worth more than small nations. And threading between them all, the heads of Italy's most powerful mafia families, wearing civilization like cologne. At the center of it all stood Raffaele Montanari. Everyone believed he was the safest man in the room. Then a young maid approached, her movements invisible among the servers. She lifted a crystal decanter, tilting it toward his glass. Without meeting his eyes, she whispered 7 words. "Your bodyguards are traitors. Leave by the back door now." She walked away before he could respond. Raphael's expression remained carved from stone. But his tattooed fingers, the Italian words honor e fede inked across his knuckles, tightened around the crystal glass until the stem threatened to crack. Because the only people who knew about that secret exit were the men assigned to protect him. The orchestra swelled with Vivaldi as Celeste Fiorentino disappeared into the sea of black uniforms and silver trays. Her heart hammered against her ribs with enough force to bruise, but her hands remained steady. Years of training had taught her that panic was a luxury she could never afford. She had been watching for 3 months. 3 months of invisible servitude. 3 months of refilling glasses and changing linens and lowering her eyes whenever powerful men swept past her like she was furniture. 3 months of listening. The Mafia underestimated servants. They always had. They spoke freely in front of the help, never considering that the woman straightening their napkins might understand every word, every code, every carefully veiled threat. Celeste had understood all of it. She had pieced together fragments of whispered conversations, intercepted glances, the subtle redistribution of guard rotations that left specific windows unmonitored at specific times. She had noticed when Massimo Vescari, the captain of Raphael's personal security, began receiving encrypted messages on a secondary phone he thought no one knew about. She had noticed everything, because noticing things had once been her entire life. Before she became a maid, before she was forced into hiding, before she had exposed corruption so deep within Italy's military intelligence that powerful men had placed a price on her head rather than face justice. Celeste Fiorentino had been one of the sharpest analysts the Italian government had ever trained. And now she was using those same skills to warn a mafia boss that his most trusted men were about to put 3 bullets in his chest. Across the great hall, Raphael set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. The crystal met marble with a sound too soft for anyone to hear above the music, but it echoed through his skull like a gunshot. His steel-gray eyes swept the room with practiced calm, cataloging faces, positions, exits. The tattooed lion on his right forearm seemed to flex as his muscles tensed beneath the sleeve of his black Italian suit. To his left stood Marco, 6 years of loyal service. To his right, Dario, his driver for almost a decade. Behind him, positioned at the entrance to the private corridor, Massimo Vescari watched the crowd with the alert stillness of a predator. Raphael had trusted Massimo with his life more times than he could count. The man had taken a knife meant for Raphael's kidney during a negotiation gone wrong in Naples. He had personally eliminated 3 assassination attempts before they could reach execution. And now, according to a servant girl whose name he didn't even know, Massimo was going to kill him. Raphael's jaw tightened. The words inked across his neck, "Il silenzio vince," seemed to burn against his skin. Silence prevails. It was the first lesson his father had taught him before a rival family's bullet had silenced the old man forever. Never react. Never reveal. Never let them see you bleed. He reached for his wine glass again, bringing it to his lips without drinking. Over the rim he found the maid. She stood near the far wall, arranging canapes on a silver tray with the mechanical efficiency of someone trying very hard not to be noticed. Her dark chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her uniform pressed and unremarkable. She was pretty in a quiet way, high cheekbones, hazel eyes that seemed too alert for a servant. Those eyes, they weren't the eyes of someone who cleaned houses for a living. They were the eyes of someone who knew how to read a room like others read newspapers. Raphael watched her for 17 seconds. 19. She didn't look at him once. Not a single glance to see if her warning had landed. Not a flicker of expectation or fear. She simply continued arranging food as though she hadn't just uttered words that could reshape the entire Italian underworld. That restraint told him more than any confession could. Whoever this woman was, she was no ordinary maid. The grandfather clock in the corner struck 10. Raphael knew the layout of the Belladonna estate the way other men knew their own heartbeat. He had spent his childhood running through these halls, hiding from his father's rages, learning the secret passages that generations of Montaneris had carved into the ancient walls. The back door the maid had mentioned was one of those secrets. A service exit hidden behind a false panel in the wine cellar, installed 300 years ago when his ancestors needed escape routes from political enemies. Only 4 people alive knew about that door: Raphael, his elderly housekeeper, Adelina, his right-hand man, Tommaso Greco, and Massimo Vescari, who had been shown the exit 5 years ago during a security review. Raphael's blood turned to ice. If the maid knew about the back door, she had learned it from someone. And if she was telling him to use it, she believed the primary exits were compromised. Which meant this wasn't paranoia. This was happening tonight. He set down his glass with final precision and turned toward the crowd with the easy smile of a man who commanded empires. "If you'll excuse me," he said to the minister he'd been pretending to listen to, "I have a call to make." Of course," the minister said, too eager to please. "Business never sleeps, eh?" Raphael's smile didn't reach his eyes. Business never slept. Neither did betrayal. Celeste's hands trembled as she carried the empty tray toward the kitchen. Not from fear. She had long ago learned to separate her body's responses from her mind's clarity, but from adrenaline. She had done it. After 3 months of silent observation, 3 months of living in the belly of one of Italy's most dangerous families, she had finally acted. The smart thing would have been to stay quiet, to keep her head down, to let the Mafia sort out its own bloody business while she remained invisible, safe, forgotten. But Celeste had never been good at the smart thing. She had watched Raphael Montanari for 93 days. Watched him move through his empire like a man carrying weights no one else could see. Watched him speak to servants with absent courtesy, while his own men sneered at anyone beneath their station. She had watched him sit alone in the library at 3 in the morning, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him, staring at a photograph of a woman and child she later learned had died in a car bombing meant for him. Ruthless men did not grieve at 3 in the morning. Monsters did not keep photographs of the innocent beside their hearts. Whatever Raphael Montanari was, and Celeste harbored no illusions about the violence required to rule his world, he was not a monster. And she could not stand by and watch him be executed by men he trusted. The kitchen doors swung closed behind her, cutting off the orchestral swell. Industrial steel gleamed under harsh fluorescent lighting. Cooks barked orders. Servers rushed in and out like a human assembly line. No one looked at her. No one ever looked at her. Celeste set down her tray and allowed herself one steadying breath. The warning was delivered. Whatever happened next was beyond her control. All she could do now was wait and pray that Raphael Montanari was smart enough to run. He wasn't running. Raphael descended the marble staircase with measured steps, acknowledging guests with brief nods, allowing them to believe he was simply making his rounds. His tattooed hands remained loose at his sides, but his mind was calculating trajectories, timing, probabilities. If Massimo wanted him dead tonight, there were limited windows of opportunity. The gala was too public, too many witnesses from families that would demand answers. No, the strike would come later, after the guests departed, when the estate settled into the vulnerable quiet of late night. Unless the strike was meant to look like something else entirely. An accident, a random act of violence blamed on a rival family, a medical emergency with no autopsy permitted. Raphael's jaw tightened as he considered the possibilities. Each one required inside knowledge, security schedules, patrol rotations, private medical history, all information Massimo had access to. The cathedral tattooed on his left forearm, black roses and olive branches surrounding ancient stone, seemed to itch beneath his sleeve. That tattoo represented everything he had built. Family, loyalty, sacrifice. And now the man sworn to protect that family was planning to destroy it. Raphael found Tommaso near the eastern entrance, watching the crowd with the sharp attention of someone who trusted no one. "Walk with me," Raphael said quietly. Tommaso fell into step without question. He was 43, built like a boxer past his prime but no less dangerous for the years. A scar cut through his right eyebrow, a memento from a warehouse ambush that had claimed 4 of their men. Tommaso had killed 7 that night, without hesitation, without mercy. He was one of 3 men Raphael trusted absolutely. They moved through the crowd, smiling, nodding, playing their parts in the grand theater of power. Only when they reached the relative privacy of the southern corridor did Raphael speak. "Tell me about Massimo." Tommaso's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "What about him?" "Everything you've noticed that you haven't reported." A pause. Then, slowly, "You already know. I want to hear it from you." Tommaso glanced over his shoulder, confirming they were alone. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 6 weeks ago, new encryption protocols on his personal device. 3 weeks ago, unexplained absence during the Calabria meeting. Last week, private conversation with Leone Bartoli's underboss that he claims never happened. Raphael absorbed each detail like bullets to the chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I had no proof. Because Massimo has bled for you, and accusing a captain requires more than suspicion." Tommaso met his eyes directly. "And because I wanted to be certain before I asked you to destroy a man who saved your life." Raphael's tattooed fingers curled at his sides. "He's not just turned," he said quietly. "He's planning something for tonight. The back exit has been compromised." Tommaso's face went pale beneath his olive skin. "How do you know?" Raphael thought of hazel eyes that saw too much, of a whisper delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. "Someone told me." "Who?" "I don't know yet." Raphael's steel-gray eyes swept the empty corridor. "But I intend to find out." 40 minutes before midnight, Celeste slipped out of the kitchen and into the service corridor that ran parallel to the great hall. The music had shifted to something slower, more intimate. Guests were beginning to filter toward the exits, exchanging hollow pleasantries and business cards. She had expected security to be thickening near the back of the estate. Instead, she found the opposite. 3 guards who should have been stationed near the wine cellar were conspicuously absent. The service entrance that connected to the hidden exit was unmonitored, something that hadn't happened once in the 3 months she had been observing. They were clearing the path, not for escape, for ambush. Celeste's blood ran cold. She had been so focused on the conspiracy against Raphael that she hadn't considered the secondary layer. The traitors weren't just planning to kill him, they were planning to intercept him when he tried to flee. They knew he would use the back door, which meant someone had fed them the warning, which meant her own message had been anticipated. Celeste pressed herself against the wall, mind racing. Either the traitors had a more extensive intelligence network than she'd realized, or there was another player in this game. Someone who knew that someone would try to warn the boss. Someone who had planned for exactly this scenario. She thought of Massimo's cold blue eyes, the patient calculation that lurked behind his every word. Of course, Massimo didn't just want Raphael dead. He wanted to eliminate anyone who might expose the conspiracy in the process. And the easiest way to identify those loyalists was to manufacture a crisis and see who tried to help. The warning wasn't anticipated. The warning was bait. And Celeste had just made herself a target. She moved through the service corridors like a ghost, retracing mental maps she had memorized during her first week at the estate. The belladonna was old, built in layers over centuries, and its architecture held secrets that most modern security systems couldn't account for. Celeste knew about the dumbwaiter shaft that connected the kitchen to the fourth-floor library. She knew about the crawlspace behind the eastern wall that had once been used by servants to move between rooms without being seen. She knew about the loose panel in the study that concealed a narrow passage to the wine cellar. She also knew that none of these routes would matter if Massimo's men were waiting for her to emerge. She needed to find Raphael before he reached the back exit. She needed to change the escape plan. The problem was finding him without being seen by the very men who were hunting him. Raphael stood alone in the security monitoring room, studying the array of screens with predatory stillness. 24 cameras covered the estate. Front entrance, rear gardens, the great hall, the kitchens, every corridor, every staircase, every room that mattered. Except one. The wine cellar feed had been looped. It was subtle, the kind of manipulation that would slip past anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. The timestamp continued to advance, but the image remained static. A frozen moment replaying endlessly while the real cellar remained unwatched. Someone with security clearance had done this. Someone who knew exactly how the system worked. Raphael's tattooed hands curled into fists. He cycled through the other feeds, searching for anything else out of place. The service corridors were empty. Too empty for a night when the kitchen should still be buzzing with cleanup. 3 guards were missing from their posts near the back of the estate. And Massimo was nowhere to be found. Raphael switched to the hallway cameras, scanning faces, searching for the one man who had sworn an oath to protect him. Instead, he found someone else. A woman in a maid's uniform, moving through the eastern service corridor with the controlled urgency of someone trying not to run. Her dark hair had come loose from its bun, soft waves falling around her face as she checked doorways and pressed herself into shadows. She wasn't running away from something. She was running toward something. Toward him. Raphael's steel-gray eyes narrowed. The maid who had whispered the warning. The servant with eyes too sharp for her station. She was coming for him, and based on her trajectory, she was heading for the security room itself. Which meant she knew where he was. Which meant she had access to information that no maid should possess. Raphael turned toward the door and waited. Celeste found the security room by following the layout she had memorized during the estate's fire drill her second week. The protocols required all personnel to know the location of critical systems. A rule that Massimo's men had implemented without considering that the maids were technically included in all personnel. She pressed her palm against the door and pushed. It swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. And Raphael Montanari was standing on the other side, watching her enter with eyes like winter steel. "Close the door," he said quietly. Celeste obeyed, her heart hammering despite herself. He was taller than he seemed from a distance, 6'4" at least, with the kind of broad shoulders that made his tailored suit look almost defensive. His black hair was styled back with precision, his jaw shadowed with light stubble, his expression carved from something harder than stone. And his tattoos, the Italian script curling up his neck, Il Silenzio Vince, catching the security monitor's glow. The Roman lion on his right forearm, visible where he had rolled his sleeves to examine the feeds. The cathedral on his left arm, olive branches and black roses marking him as clearly as any family crest. He was exactly as dangerous as his reputation suggested. But he was also alive, which meant her warning had worked. "The back exit is compromised," she said without preamble. "They're expecting you to use it. 3 guards have been repositioned to intercept anyone who enters the wine cellar from either direction. The camera feed has been looped to cover their movement." Raphael studied her face for several long seconds. "You knew about the loop. I saw the timestamp anomaly when I passed the kitchen monitor 3 minutes ago. Most servants don't know how to read security feeds. Celeste met his eyes directly. Most servants haven't spent 6 years in military intelligence. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Raphael's tattooed fingers flexed at his sides, honor-e feed catching the light like a brand. His steel-gray eyes swept over her with new assessment, cataloging details, recalculating assumptions. Military intelligence, he repeated softly. That's why they haven't found you. You're not hiding from criminals. You're hiding from the government. Former government, Celeste corrected. I exposed a corruption network that reached further than I anticipated. They made it clear I wouldn't survive the investigation. So you became invisible. I became a maid. Same thing. The corner of Raphael's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. And now you're warning a Mafia boss that his own men are trying to kill him. His head tilted slightly. Why? Celeste considered the question carefully. Because I watched you grieve at 3 in the morning. Because you speak to servants like they're human. Because despite everything I know about your world, you are not the monster they need you to be. None of those answers would serve her now. Because I refuse to watch another execution disguised as justice, she said simply. Regardless of who the target is. Raphael held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, accepting her answer without pressing for more. The back exit is compromised. What else do you know? Massimo Vescari has been communicating with someone outside the family for at least 6 weeks. Encrypted channels, secondary device, rotating IP addresses. He's been strategic about his meetings, always during moments when your attention was elsewhere. He's not working alone. How many? At minimum, 7 of your personal security team. Possibly more. I couldn't identify everyone without compromising my position. Raphael's jaw tightened. 7. 7 men he had trusted to protect his life. 7 men who had sworn oaths to his family. 7 men who had broken bread at his table, shared his wine, accepted his money. His tattooed hands clenched hard enough to make the tendons stand out beneath his skin. The rival family, he said quietly. Who's backing them? Celeste hesitated. I don't have confirmation, but based on the communication patterns and the timing of the offensive, Leone Bartoli. Raphael's expression went completely still. Leone Bartoli, the man who had been circling his territory like a vulture for 15 years. The man who had ordered the car bomb that killed his wife and daughter. The man Raphael had sworn to destroy with every breath remaining in his body. And now that same man had reached inside his own household and turned his protectors into executioners. Tell me everything, Raphael said, and his voice was cold enough to freeze blood. We don't have time. If Massimo realizes you've disappeared from the gala, he'll escalate the timetable. Then we move now. Raphael turned back to the security monitors, scanning the feeds with rapid precision. There's a secondary exit through the library. Passage behind the eastern bookcase. Leads to a maintenance tunnel that emerges in the olive grove. The library is on their patrol rotation. Not for another 12 minutes. He checked his watch, a luxury piece that probably cost more than Celeste's annual salary. We have a window. He moved toward the door, then paused. What's your name? The question caught her off guard. In 3 months, no one had asked her name. Not the other servants. Not the security. Not even Adelina, who had assigned her duties with warm efficiency and casual anonymity. She was just the new girl, or you there or nothing at all. Celeste, she said. Celeste Fiorentino. Raphael held her gaze for a single breath. Stay close to me, Celeste Fiorentino. If we survive tonight, I'm going to have a great many questions for you. Then he pulled open the door and stepped into the corridor, moving with the controlled urgency of a man who understood that every second cost something he couldn't afford. Celeste followed him into the shadows. The library of the Belladonna estate was a cathedral to knowledge. 3 stories of leather-bound volumes, spiral staircases, reading alcoves lit by amber lamps. During the day, it glowed with filtered sunlight. At night, it held the kind of heavy darkness that made every sound feel like a confession. Raphael and Celeste entered through the service door and pressed themselves against the far wall. The room appeared empty, but appearances meant nothing tonight. Raphael's steel-gray eyes swept the space, cataloging shadows, measuring distances, identifying the single exit that could save his life. The eastern bookcase stood across the room, a floor-to-ceiling wall of volumes that concealed a passage installed during the estate's original construction. His great-great-grandfather had used it to escape Napoleon's men. His grandfather had used it to survive the fascist purges. And now Raphael would use it to survive his own treacherous security team. The irony was not lost on him. He moved forward, Celeste matching his pace with the silent efficiency of someone trained to operate in hostile environments. Her hazel eyes never stopped scanning. Her body remained coiled with controlled tension. She moved like a soldier, not a servant. Military intelligence. The revelation still burned through his mind like acid. For 3 months, he had shared his home with a former government analyst who had exposed corruption and been hunted for her trouble. For 3 months, she had moved through his estate, observing his operations, cataloging his vulnerabilities, saying nothing. And when the moment came, when his life hung in the balance, she had chosen to warn him. Why? The question gnawed at him with teeth sharper than suspicion. No one acted without motive. No one risked their life for a stranger unless something drove them to it. Fear, debt, leverage, ambition. Celeste Fiorentino had nothing to gain from saving him and everything to lose from exposing herself, which meant her motives were either incredibly noble or incredibly hidden. Raphael didn't believe in noble motives, but he also didn't have time to interrogate her. That conversation would come later, assuming either of them survived the night. They reached the eastern bookcase without incident. Raphael counted volumes from the left, 3 rows down, 7 books in. His tattooed fingers found the spine of a leather-bound Dante and pressed. A soft click echoed through the silence. The bookcase swung inward, revealing a passage barely wide enough for his shoulders. "After you," he murmured. Celeste glanced at the darkness beyond, then back at him. "I'd rather follow," she said quietly. "You know the passage. I don't." He held her gaze for a moment, recognizing the tactical wisdom in her choice. Following meant she could watch for pursuit. Following meant she could guard his back. Following meant she trusted him enough to let him lead. Raphael nodded once and stepped into the darkness. The passage was cold and narrow, smelling of dust and centuries of disuse. Raphael moved by memory, counting steps, turning at intervals. His body remembered even when his mind was occupied with darker calculations. 7 traitors. Minimum. 7 men who had stood behind him during negotiations. 7 men who had shared his confidence. 7 men who had smiled to his face while planning his murder. How many others? How deep did the rot extend? Massimo Vescari had been with him for 11 years. He had been present during sensitive meetings, strategic planning sessions, private conversations that no outsider should ever have heard. He knew the locations of safe houses, the identities of informants, the vulnerabilities of allied families. If he had been feeding information to Leon Bartoli for even a fraction of that time, the damage was incalculable. Raphael's jaw tightened until the muscles ached. Behind him, Celeste moved in near silence. Her breathing was controlled, her footsteps carefully placed to avoid echoes. She was adapting to the passage's constraints with the fluid efficiency of someone accustomed to operating in difficult terrain. "Who are you really?" he wondered. "What else haven't you told me?" The questions would have to wait. They emerged from the passage into a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the estate's eastern wing. The air was marginally fresher here, tinged with the distant scent of olive groves and night-blooming jasmine. The exit was close. Raphael allowed himself one moment of hope. Then he heard the footsteps. 3 men, heavy boots, tactical formation, moving with the coordinated precision of professionals. They were waiting. Raphael's hand moved to the gun concealed beneath his jacket, a compact Beretta that never left his person. Beside him, Celeste pressed herself against the tunnel wall, her hazel eyes gone sharp with focus. "They anticipated this route," she whispered. "How?" Someone talked. Or someone observed your patterns well enough to predict them. Raphael's mind raced through possibilities. The maintenance tunnel was old, but not secret. Any thorough search of the estate's architectural records would have revealed it. Massimo would have had access to those records during security reviews. Of course he had planned for this. The man had spent 11 years learning every inch of the Belladonna estate. Every passage, every exit, every shadow. He had been preparing for this night longer than Raphael wanted to admit. Alternative route? Celeste asked. One. But it's longer, and it exits closer to the main grounds. Then they'll expect it too. Raphael's steel-gray eyes met hers in the darkness. Yes. The footsteps grew louder. Celeste's hand closed around his wrist, a grip surprisingly strong for her slim frame. There's another option. If the primary exits are compromised, we need to move toward the one place they won't expect you to go. Where? Back inside. Raphael stared at her. They're hunting you outside the estate. Every exit route, every escape path, they're positioned for flight. They're not prepared for a target who reverses direction. You want me to return to a house full of men who want to kill me? I want you to return to a house full of guests who haven't left yet. Witnesses, politicians, judges, men whose silence would cost Leon Bartoli more than your death is worth. The logic was insane. The logic was brilliant. Raphael's tattooed fingers tightened around the beretta. If we go back, we're trapped until the last guest leaves. But we're alive until the last guest leaves. And that gives us time to identify the full scope of the conspiracy. Celeste's hazel eyes held steady. They want you to run. They've built their entire plan around the assumption that you'll flee. Deny them that assumption and you change the game. The footsteps were almost upon them. Raphael made his decision in the span of a heartbeat. This way. He grabbed Celeste's hand and pulled her into a secondary passage so narrow they had to move single file. The darkness here was absolute. The air thick with dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades. Behind them, the footsteps faltered. Confused voices. Orders to spread out. The click of safeties being disengaged. Raphael moved faster, pulling Celeste through the blackness by feel alone. His free hand traced the wall, counting stones, measuring distances from memory. Left turn. 20 steps. Right turn. 15 steps. The passage opened into a storage cellar that connected to the kitchen. They emerged into fluorescent light and the startled face of an elderly woman holding a tray of dirty glasses. Adelina Romano dropped the tray with a crash. Don Montanari. Her silver hair caught the harsh light as she pressed a hand to her chest. You frightened me half to death. Raphael steadied her with both hands, his tattooed knuckles ghosting against her wool-covered arm. Adelina, I need your help. The housekeeper's kind eyes sharpened with an intelligence that belied her years. She looked at Raphael, then at Celeste, then at the passage behind them. The new girl, she said slowly. I thought there was more to her than she let on. You knew. I suspected. Adelina's expression hardened. Something has been wrong in this house for months. Don Montanari. Couldn't name it. But I felt it. Can you feel who we can trust? The elderly woman's smile was sad and knowing. Trust is expensive these days. But there are a few who have never forgotten their oaths. Her eyes met Celeste's. You warned him? Yes. Good girl. Adelina nodded once. Follow me. Both of you. I know where to hide you until we can sort through this nest of vipers. She turned and walked toward the back of the kitchen with the quiet authority of someone who had been running this house since before Raphael was born. Raphael glanced at Celeste. Something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. Then they followed the elderly housekeeper into the shadows. Adelina led them through service corridors that even Celeste hadn't mapped, past laundry rooms and storage closets, until they reached a door that looked like nothing more than a forgotten linen closet. The housekeeper produced a key from the chain around her neck. This room has been secret since my grandmother's time, she said quietly. Even your father didn't know about it. God rest his soul. The door opened into a small chamber no larger than a modest bedroom. Inside were 2 chairs, a cot, a table with emergency supplies, and, most importantly, a wall of surveillance monitors that displayed feeds from cameras Celeste had never seen before. Hidden cameras, positioned throughout the estate, capturing angles the official security system couldn't. Raphael's steel-gray eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Adelina, my grandmother was housekeeper to your great-grandfather. She saw him betrayed 3 times before he learned to watch the Watchers. The elderly woman's expression was fierce beneath its kindness. The Montanari family has survived for 3 centuries because we learned that loyalty must be verified, not assumed. She moved to the monitors and began cycling through feeds. These cameras are on a separate network, entirely offline. No one in your security team knows they exist. Why didn't you tell me? Because I hoped I would never need to. Adelina's fingers paused over a control panel. Until tonight, I believed the threat came from outside. Now I see that the rot has reached the roots. The monitors flickered through images. The great hall nearly empty now. The kitchen's staff beginning cleanup. The corridors, dark and silent. And then, a gathering. 7 men in a room Celeste recognized as the security command center. Massimo Vescari stood at the center, his sharp blue eyes cold with purpose. Around him, the faces of guards she had seen countless times without truly seeing. They were arguing. Adelina turned up the audio. Lost him in the tunnels. He could be anywhere by now. He won't go far. Massimo's voice was calm, patient, terrifyingly assured. The estate is surrounded. Every exit is covered. He has nowhere to run. What if he returns to the main house? Then we wait. The guests are leaving. In 2 hours, the estate will be empty enough for a clean extraction. Clean extraction. The clinical euphemism for murder. Celeste watched Raphael's expression harden into something beyond anger. Something cold and calculating and absolutely lethal. His tattooed hands curled into fists at his sides. The words honorary feed standing out against skin gone pale with controlled rage. On the screen, Massimo continued. Leone Bartoli has guaranteed our futures. New territories. New authority. The old ways are dying. It's time for the Montanari Empire to change hands. One of the men shifted uncomfortably. What about the staff? The ones not involved? Massimo's smile was thin as a knife's edge. Collateral damage is inevitable in any transition of power. Those who know too much will be handled. Those who know nothing will be left to rebuild under new leadership. His eyes swept the room. Is there a problem with that? The uncomfortable man fell silent. Celeste felt cold creep through her veins. Collateral damage. That meant the maids who had witnessed suspicious activity. The cooks who had overheard private conversations. The groundskeepers who might have seen too much. People like her. People like Adelina. People who had committed no crime beyond existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Massimo was planning to kill them all. Raphael's voice was quiet enough to cut glass. How long has this been planned? On the screen, the meeting continued logistical details, timing, positioning. The clinical efficiency of professionals discussing the elimination of a man they had once sworn to protect. Celeste answered when Adelina remained silent. Based on the communication patterns I've observed, at least 6 months. Possibly longer. Massimo is patient. He would have waited until the opportunity was perfect. The charity gala. The largest gathering of witnesses in months. Politicians, judges, business leaders, all potential alibis. If something happened to you tonight, there would be dozens of powerful people prepared to swear they saw nothing suspicious. Raphael's jaw tightened. Leone Bartoli approached him. That's my assessment. Bartoli has been circling your territory for years, but he's never had the inside access to strike effectively. Until someone with intimate knowledge of your security offered it to him. Massimo. Yes. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Raphael turned away from the monitors, his steel-gray eyes distant with calculation. The lion on his forearm seemed to flex as he rolled his shoulders, shedding tension that had nowhere else to go. I trusted him, he said quietly. I trusted him with everything. Celeste said nothing. There was nothing to say. Betrayal didn't require an explanation. It only required a moment of misplaced faith. Adelina touched his arm gently. "What do you need from me, Don Montanari?" Raphael was silent for a long moment. Then his expression hardened into something absolute. "I need to know who else is loyal. I need to contain the traitors before they realize they've lost the element of surprise. And I need to survive the next 4 hours until my true allies can reach us. Tommaso, I sent him to prepare the secondary communications array before the gala started. If he's still alive, he'll be monitoring for my signal." Adelina nodded. "The array is in the eastern wing. I can get a message to him without being seen." "Do it. Tell him we're in lockdown protocol. Tell him to trust no one in uniform." The elderly woman moved toward the door, then paused. "And the girl?" Raphael's eyes found Celeste's. Something passed between them, evaluation, perhaps, or the recognition of unexpected allies in an impossible situation. "She stays with me," he said finally. "She's proven herself more reliable than men I've known for years." Adelina's gaze softened with something like approval. "Wise choice." Then she was gone, the hidden door sealing behind her with barely a whisper. Celeste and Raphael stood alone in the surveillance room, surrounded by screens that displayed the death of everything he had built. "Why?" he asked again, and this time the question carried different weight. Not suspicion, not calculation, something closer to wonder. "Why did you warn me?" Celeste held his gaze without flinching. "Because I spent 6 years serving a government that claimed to protect people while destroying them from the inside. I exposed them. They tried to kill me for it. I've been running ever since, hiding in plain sight, pretending to be no one." She took a breath. "When I came to this estate, I expected to find another monster. Another powerful man who used people and discarded them without consequence. Instead, I found someone who speaks to servants like they matter, who grieves for the innocent at 3 in the morning when he thinks no one is watching." Raphael's expression flickered. "You watched me in the library. I watched everything. It's what I was trained to do. And you concluded that I was worth saving. I concluded that you were not what they say you are." Celeste's hazel eyes held steady. "Whatever crimes you've committed, whatever violence your world requires, you are not a monster. And I will not stand by while better men are destroyed by worse ones." The silence that followed was heavy enough to sink through stone. Raphael's tattooed hands uncurled slowly. His steel-gray eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Not with fear, but with the unsettling awareness that she had just revealed far more than tactical information. She had revealed herself. "Celeste Fiorentino," he said quietly, her name rolling off his tongue like an invocation. "Former military intelligence analyst. Currently hiding as a maid in my household. Apparently possessed of the conviction that warning a Mafia boss about assassination is a reasonable use of her evening." The corner of his mouth twitched. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the most dangerously foolish." "Perhaps both," she admitted. Something shifted in his expression, the faintest ghost of genuine amusement breaking through the stone. "Perhaps." He turned back to the monitors, watching Massimo's men disperse through the estate like wolves scattering for a hunt. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I'm going to want the full story, every detail of what you know, every piece of intelligence you've gathered during your time here. I understand. In exchange, I will offer you protection, the kind that even governments cannot breach." Celeste's breath caught. Protection. The word meant something different in his world. It meant resources, connections, the ability to disappear so completely that her old enemies would never find her. It meant safety, real safety, for the first time in 2 years. "Why would you offer that?" she asked carefully. "You barely know me." Raphael's steel-gray eyes met hers. "Because you risked your life to save mine when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Because you could have remained invisible. And instead you chose to warn the very man your world taught you to fear." His tattooed fingers brushed his neck, the Italian script curling above his collar. "Il silenzio vince." Silence prevails. In my world, he continued quietly, actions speak louder than oaths. You have proven your loyalty in a single evening more thoroughly than men who have served me for decades. That is worth protecting. Celeste felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been frozen for 2 years beginning to thaw. Trust. The dangerous beginning of trust. Then I accept, she said. Your protection. In exchange for everything I know. Raphael nodded once. Good. The monitors flickered as Massimo's men continued their search. Somewhere in the estate, loyal men waited for signals. Somewhere beyond the walls, enemies circled like vultures. And in the hidden room that time had forgotten, a Mafia boss and a maid began to plan a war that neither of them had expected. The next 2 hours passed in tense coordination. Tommaso made contact through the secondary array, his voice crackling through an encrypted channel that Massimo's people didn't know existed. He was alive. He was uncompromised. And he had 3 men with him whose loyalty he could personally guarantee. 3 men out of a security team of 24. The numbers were devastating. But Raphael had survived worse odds. Through the hidden surveillance feeds, he and Celeste watched Massimo's conspiracy unfold. They cataloged faces. They mapped positions. They identified the precise locations where traps had been set and the exact timing of patrol rotations. Information became their weapon. Celeste contributed analysis with the sharp efficiency of someone who had spent years dismantling enemy operations from the inside. She identified communication patterns. She predicted behavioral shifts. She spotted vulnerabilities that even Raphael had missed. She was brilliant, dangerously, unexpectedly brilliant. Raphael found himself watching her as much as the monitors. The way her hazel eyes narrowed with focus, the way her slim fingers traced patterns on the table as she thought, the way her voice softened when she was working through complex scenarios. She was beautiful. He had noticed that before in the abstract way that powerful men noticed attractive servants. But now, in the harsh glow of hidden surveillance, in the crucible of survival, he saw her with new eyes. Not just beautiful, compelling, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with weapons. He pushed the thought aside. There would be time for that later, if they survived. At 3 in the morning, Tommaso's team reached their position. At 3:15, Adelina confirmed that the last guests had departed and the estate had entered its nighttime lockdown. At 3:30, Massimo made his move. The monitors showed it all. 8 men converging on the master suite where Raphael was supposed to be sleeping. Weapons drawn. Suppressors attached. Moving with the coordinated precision of a military strike team. They breached the door at 3:32. They found an empty bed. For 17 seconds, chaos erupted. Orders shouted into radios. Men scrambling to search adjoining rooms. Massimo's face, usually so controlled, twisted with something approaching fear. The prey had escaped, and now the hunters were exposed. Now, Raphael said quietly, the lights went out. Not just in the master wing. Throughout the entire estate. Every room, every corridor, every camera that ran on the primary power grid. All of it went dark in the same instant. Except the hidden surveillance system, which ran on an entirely separate power source. In the darkness, Celeste watched Tommaso's team move. 3 men, armed and silent, emerging from positions that Massimo's people had never thought to guard. They moved with the fluid precision of professionals who had trained together for years. The first traitor fell without a sound. The second managed a strangled cry before darkness claimed him. By the time the third realized what was happening, it was already too late. Massimo Vescari was a strategist. He had spent 11 years learning Raphael's methods, studying his patterns, anticipating his decisions. But he had never anticipated this. The woman beside Raphael in the surveillance room, the maid no one had noticed, was feeding real-time intelligence through a channel he couldn't intercept. His men were being eliminated one by one in a darkness he couldn't navigate. His carefully laid plans were unraveling with every passing minute. And Raphael Montanari was nowhere to be found. Massimo made a decision. If he couldn't find the boss, he would draw him out. "Find the old woman," he ordered through his radio. Adelina Romano. Bring her to me. The response crackled back immediately. Sir, the housekeeper's quarters are. I don't care where they are. Find her. Now. Silence. Then, understood. Massimo's sharp blue eyes swept the darkened corridors as he moved toward the central staircase. Raphael Montanari was sentimental about his household staff. Everyone knew it. He treated the servants like family, remembered their names, attended their celebrations. It was a weakness, and weaknesses could be exploited. In the hidden room, Celeste went pale. They're going after Adelina. Raphael's tattooed hands curled into fists. Where is she? She was heading back to the kitchen when she left us. If they've cut off that corridor, they'll have her in minutes. The surveillance feeds confirmed it. 2 of Massimo's remaining men were converging on the kitchen service corridor. Adelina was visible on the hidden camera, an elderly woman in a black dress, moving too slowly to escape. She didn't know they were coming. She had no warning, no way to defend herself. Raphael's jaw tightened until the muscles strained beneath his stubble. I'm going after her. That's exactly what Massimo wants. He's using her as bait. I know. Celeste caught his arm as he turned toward the door. Then don't give him what he wants. There has to be another way. There isn't. Raphael's steel-gray eyes met hers with absolute certainty. Adelina has served my family for 43 years. She protected my mother during the worst of my father's rages. She held me when my wife and daughter died. She is the closest thing I have left to family. His voice dropped to something raw. I will not let them take her. Celeste held his gaze for a long moment. Then she released his arm. Then I'm coming with you. No. You need someone to watch your back. Your remaining loyalists are spread thin, and you don't know the hidden passages as well as you think you do. I've spent 3 months mapping them. You're not trained for combat. I'm trained to survive. Her hazel eyes flashed with something fierce. And I didn't save your life just to watch you throw it away on a solo rescue mission. The silence stretched between them like a drawn blade. Raphael's tattooed fingers flexed at his sides. He should refuse. He should lock her in this room and go alone. He should protect the woman who had already given him more than she owed. But there was something in her eyes, something that reminded him of steel wrapped in silk, and he found himself nodding against every instinct. Stay close. Follow my lead. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood. They moved toward the hidden door together. Behind them, the monitors continued their silent watch. On the screen, Adelina reached the end of the corridor. 2 armed men stepped out of the shadows to intercept her. The elderly woman's scream echoed through the speakers. Raphael moved through the hidden passages like a ghost, Celeste close behind him. His beretta was in his hand now, the weight of it as familiar as his own heartbeat. The tattoos on his forearms caught fragments of emergency lighting. The lion, the cathedral, the words that had defined his life. Honor e feed, honor and faith. Tonight, those words would be tested. They emerged from the passage into a service hallway near the kitchen. The scream had stopped, either silenced or simply exhausted, and the estate had fallen into the heavy stillness of violence anticipated. Raphael pressed himself against the wall, listening. Footsteps. Heavy. Close. He counted them, 2 sets, both moving with the weight of armed men. They were taking Adelina somewhere, probably the main dining room, where Massimo liked to conduct interrogations. Raphael's jaw tightened. He knew that room. He knew its layout. He knew where to position himself for maximum advantage. Follow me, he breathed. They moved through the shadows like smoke, skirting the edges of light, avoiding the corridors where Massimo's remaining men were searching. The estate's darkness had become their ally. Tommaso's team had disabled the backup generators as part of the lockdown protocol, leaving only emergency lighting in critical areas. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They reached the dining room from the servants' entrance, a door so rarely used that most of the security team didn't even know it existed. Through the crack in the doorframe, Raphael could see the tableau inside. Adelina, forced into a chair at the head of the table. Her silver hair had come loose from its usual neat arrangement. her kind face pale with fear but determined. Two guards flanking her. And Massimo Vescari, standing at the window, his sharp blue eyes scanning the darkness outside as though he could will his prey to appear. "He'll come," Massimo was saying, his voice carrying the patient certainty of a man who believed he had already won. Raphael has always been sentimental about the help. It's his greatest weakness. "And if he doesn't?" one of the guards asked. Massimo's smile was thin. "Then we start making examples. Beginning with her." Adelina's chin lifted. "Raphael Montanari will not be broken by threats against an old woman. And you, Massimo Vescari, will burn for what you've done tonight." "Perhaps," Massimo shrugged. "But I'll burn as a wealthy man, with territory and power that Raphael's father only dreamed of. Leone Bartoli is generous with those who serve him well. Leone Bartoli is a serpent. He'll swallow you the moment you're no longer useful. A risk I'm willing to take." Massimo turned from the window. His blue eyes swept the room. For a heartbeat, Raphael was certain the man would see him, would catch some flicker of movement through the crack in the door. But Massimo's attention returned to Adelina. "Where is he, old woman? Where does Raphael hide when the world turns against him?" "I don't know." "Lie. Kill me if you must. I have nothing to tell you." Massimo's expression flickered with something like admiration. "Loyalty," he said quietly. "Such a rare commodity these days. I almost wish I could afford it." He drew his gun, and Raphael moved. The door burst inward with enough force to slam one guard into the wall. Raphael's first shot took the second guard through the shoulder before the man could raise his weapon. Massimo spun, gun already lifting. He was fast, but Raphael had been trained by ghosts. The bullet caught Massimo's forearm, sending his weapon skittering across the polished floor. The traitor dropped to one knee with a grunt of pain, blood seeping through his expensive sleeve. "Don Montanari." Massimo's voice was steady despite the wound. "I wondered how long you would make me wait." Raphael's steel-gray eyes were cold enough to freeze. 11 years, Massimo. You served me for 11 years. I served your family's interests, until those interests no longer aligned with survival. Survival. The word came out like a curse. You betrayed everything I trusted you with for Leone Bartoli's money? For Leone Bartoli's future. Massimo's smile was thin, bloody, unrepentant. Your empire is dying, Raphael. You've been too focused on your grief, too distracted by ghosts, to see the walls crumbling around you. The other families smell weakness. They circle like wolves. In 5 years, perhaps less, there will be nothing left of the Montanari name but graveyards and regret. So you decided to accelerate the process. I decided to survive, as I have always done. Raphael's tattooed hands tightened on the Beretta. His finger rested against the trigger. One squeeze, one moment, one execution. It would be so easy. Don Montanari. Celeste's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. She had emerged from the servants' entrance, positioning herself near Adelina with the protective instincts that seemed to define her. Her hazel eyes were fixed on Raphael's face. Not on the gun, not on Massimo, but on him. He's not alone in this conspiracy, she said quietly. He has intelligence that could expose the full scope of Leone Bartoli's network. Intelligence you need if you want to dismantle it completely. Massimo laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. The Maid plays strategist. How charming. Celeste ignored him. Kill him now and you lose everything he knows. Every contact, every channel, every vulnerability in Bartoli's operation. The conspiracy continues without him. Smaller, perhaps, but no less dangerous. Raphael's jaw tightened. She was right. He hated that she was right. Tommaso, he said into the radio at his collar. Converge on the main dining room. We have a prisoner. The response crackled back immediately. En route. 2 minutes. Raphael's steel-gray eyes returned to Massimo. You're going to tell me everything. Every name. Every plan. Every piece of information you fed to Leone Bartoli. And if I refuse? Then I'll demonstrate exactly why my enemies call me the Devil of Tuscany. Something flickered in Massimo's sharp blue eyes. Fear. For the first time since the night began. Real, genuine fear. Tommaso arrived with 2 of his loyal men, securing Massimo and the wounded guards with brutal efficiency. The traitor was bound, gagged, and dragged toward the estate's private detention facility, a converted wine cellar that had seen its share of difficult conversations over the years. Adelina was unharmed but shaken. Celeste helped the elderly woman to a chair, fetching water and blankets while the chaos of the night slowly began to settle into the stillness of aftermath. Raphael stood alone by the window where Massimo had stood only minutes before. The darkness outside was beginning to soften, the first gray hints of dawn touching the Tuscan hills. In a few hours, the sun would rise over the Belladonna estate, illuminating everything that had changed. 7 traitors, 7 men who would face judgment, and one conspiracy that stretched far beyond the walls of his own household. Leone Bartoli. The name burned through Raphael's mind like acid. The man who had killed his wife and daughter. The man who had been circling his territory for 15 years. The man who had now reached inside his own home and turned his protectors into assassins. This was not over. This was only beginning. Don Montanari. Celeste's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her hazel eyes soft with exhaustion. The maid's uniform she still wore was smudged with dust and shadows, a reminder of everything she had been before this night, and everything she had become. Adelina is resting, she said. Tommaso has secured the remaining loyalists and is coordinating a full security sweep of the estate. Good. The immediate threat is contained. But the war is just beginning. Celeste nodded slowly. Raphael turned from the window, his steel-gray eyes finding hers. You should rest too. You've done more tonight than anyone could have asked. I don't think I could sleep if I tried. A faint smile touched her lips. Adrenaline has a way of lasting longer than it should. I know the feeling. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, but weighted with everything that remained unsaid. Thank you, Raphael said quietly, for warning me, for staying. He gestured vaguely at the night, the estate, the wreckage of everything he thought he knew. For all of it. Celeste held his gaze. I told you why. You told me reasons. Logic. Analysis. His tattooed fingers brushed the script at his neck. But you didn't tell me the truth. What truth? Why a woman hiding from her own government would risk everything to save a man like me. The question hung between them like smoke. Celeste was silent for a long moment. Then, softly, because you reminded me of someone I used to believe in. Who? Myself. Her hazel eyes glistened. Before they broke me. Before they turned everything I trusted into ash. Before I stopped believing that anyone with power could use it for anything but destruction. She took a breath. You grieve like someone who still believes in love. You protect like someone who still believes in family. You rule like someone who still believes in honor. Her voice dropped. I had forgotten what that looked like. Raphael's chest tightened with something he couldn't name. This woman, this stranger who had materialized from the shadows of his own household, had seen him more clearly in 3 months of silent observation than people who had known him for decades. She had seen the grief. She had seen the loneliness. She had seen the man beneath the monster's reputation. And she had chosen to save him anyway. Celeste, he said, and her name felt different on his tongue now. Not a stranger's name, not a servant's name, something else entirely. When this is over, when Leone Bartoli has been dealt with and my house is secure, I want you to stay. Her eyes widened slightly. Stay. Not as a maid. Not as a servant. His steel-gray gaze held hers without wavering. As an advisor. As an ally. He paused, uncertain how to define what he was feeling. As someone I can trust. Celeste's breath caught. In all her years of service, to her country, to ideals, to the abstract concept of justice, no one had ever offered her trust like this. Raw. Unconditional. Real. She swallowed. I don't know what to say. Say yes. The simplicity of it almost made her laugh. Say yes. As though that was all it took. As though a single word could reshape the wreckage of her life into something new. Yes, she whispered. Raphael's expression softened. Not quite a smile, but something warmer than his usual stone. Good. The first light of dawn touched the windows behind him, painting him in shades of gold and shadow. His tattoos caught the light. The lion, the cathedral, the words that had defined his life. And for a moment, Celeste could see the man he might have been in another world. Not a mafia boss, not a monster, just a man, standing in the ruins of everything he had built, reaching toward something he didn't yet understand. The estate slowly returned to a semblance of order as the sun rose. Tommaso's security sweep confirmed that all traitors had been neutralized or captured. The loyal staff were gathered, reassured, given explanations that would satisfy without revealing too much. The hidden surveillance room remained secret, a tool for another day. Massimo's interrogation began at midday. Celeste was not present for it. Some things, she understood, were better left to men who had been raised in shadows. Instead, she found herself in the kitchen, helping the cooks prepare a late breakfast that no one seemed hungry for. The routine was familiar, comforting, a tether to the life she had lived before last night changed everything. She was chopping vegetables when Adelina appeared beside her. The elderly housekeeper looked tired but steady, her silver hair neatly rearranged, her black dress pressed and proper. "You saved his life," Adelina said without preamble. "I warned him. Others did the saving. Don't diminish what you did, child." The housekeeper's kind eyes were fierce. "Tommaso told me how you guided him through the estate, how you identified the ambush positions, how you refused to leave his side even when logic demanded you run." Celeste's hands stilled on the knife. "I couldn't have run," she admitted quietly. "Something wouldn't let me. Love is like that sometimes." Celeste's head snapped up. We only just." Adelina's smile was knowing. "I've been watching people in this house for 43 years, child. I know what I see. You don't see anything. There's nothing to see. Perhaps not yet." The housekeeper's hand covered hers gently. "But there will be. Mark my words." She walked away before Celeste could respond, leaving the younger woman standing frozen at the counter, her heart beating far too fast for comfort. 3 days passed. 3 days of security restructuring, interrogation reports, and careful planning. 3 days of Raphael closeted with Tommaso and a handful of trusted advisors, mapping the full extent of Leone Bartoli's conspiracy. Celeste saw him only in glimpses, across hallways, in doorways, through windows that framed him against the Tuscan hills. Each time their eyes met. Each time something unspoken passed between them. And each time, one or both of them looked away before it could become something more. On the 4th day, he summoned her to the library. The afternoon light fell through tall windows, painting the leather-bound volumes in shades of amber and gold. Raphael stood near the eastern bookcase, the one that concealed the passage that had saved both their lives, his back to the door. He was in shirt sleeves, the fabric rolled to his elbows, exposing the full expanse of his tattooed forearms. The lion, the cathedral, the olive branches and black roses that marked him as a Montanari. He turned as she entered. His steel-gray eyes found hers immediately. "Close the door," Celeste obeyed. The click of the latch echoed through the silence. "Massimo talked," Raphael said without preamble. "He gave us everything. Names, channels, the full scope of Leone Bartoli's operation. That's good. It's more than good. It's enough to dismantle his entire network, but only if we move quickly, before word of Massimo's capture reaches the wrong ears." He moved toward the window, his silhouette sharp against the afternoon light. "I'm calling a meeting of the allied families. Tomorrow night, here at the Belladonna. We'll coordinate a simultaneous strike against Bartoli's operations across 6 territories." Celeste absorbed this. "You want me there. I need you there." He turned to face her. "Your analysis has been invaluable. Your understanding of intelligence networks, communication patterns, operational security. I have men who have served me for years who don't see what you see. I was trained for it. Then use that training. His steel gray eyes held hers. Stand beside me tomorrow. Help me present the intelligence we've gathered. Let the other families see what I see when I look at you. And what is that? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Raphael's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through the stone. Someone worth trusting, he said quietly. Someone worth protecting. Someone who sees through masks that have fooled everyone else. Celeste's breath caught. Raphael. It was the first time she had used his name without his title. His eyes darkened at the sound of it. There's something else, he said. Something I should tell you before tomorrow. What? Leon Bartoli knows about you. The words hit her like ice water. What? Massimo told him, as part of his intelligence report. Raphael's jaw tightened. Bartoli knows there's a former government analyst hiding in my household. He knows you have information about corruption networks that could threaten his allies in the government. He knows you're valuable. Celeste's mind raced. If Bartoli knew about her, her former enemies would know too. The people who had tried to silence her 2 years ago. The people who had put a price on her head. Her cover was blown. Her safety was gone. I should leave, she heard herself say. If Bartoli tells the wrong people, if word reaches the intelligence community. You're not going anywhere. Raphael's voice was sharp. Final. I told you I would protect you. That wasn't an empty promise. You can't protect me from the entire Italian government. Watch me. He moved toward her, closing the distance between them until she could see the individual threads of steel in his gray eyes. I have resources that reach into every corner of this country. Judges, politicians, intelligence officers who owe me favors they can never repay. If your former enemies want to find you, they'll have to go through me. Why? The word came out raw. Why would you do this? I'm no one. A maid who happened to overhear the right conversations. You could let me disappear. Let me run again. No. It would be safer for everyone if I just... Celeste. Her name stopped her cold. Raphael's tattooed hand rose to cup her face. Gentle despite its strength, warm despite the blood that stained his history. You are not no one, he said quietly. You are the woman who saved my life. The woman who saw me clearly when everyone else saw only the monster they expected. The woman who reminded me what trust looks like. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I am not letting you disappear. Celeste's heart was pounding hard enough to hurt. This is dangerous, she whispered. Whatever this is, whatever is happening between us, it's dangerous. Everything in my world is dangerous. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean. His steel gray eyes held hers. And then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he kissed her. The kiss was gentle, careful. The kiss of a man who had lost too much and feared losing more. Celeste felt the weight of his history in that touch. The grief, the loneliness, the carefully constructed walls that had protected his heart for years. And she felt the cracks forming, the vulnerability breaking through, the beginning of something that neither of them had expected. When they finally separated, Raphael's forehead rested against hers. Stay, he breathed. Not because I'm ordering you to. Not because you have nowhere else to go. Stay because you want to. Celeste's hazel eyes glistened. I want to, she admitted. Good. His lips brushed hers again, briefer this time but no less significant. Then tomorrow you stand beside me, and we end this war together. That night, Celeste couldn't sleep. She lay in the small room that had been assigned to her when she first arrived at the estate. Modest quarters for a maid, comfortable enough but unremarkable. The walls had witnessed 3 months of careful anonymity, 3 months of hiding in plain sight. Now everything had changed. She rose and walked to the window. The Tuscan hills stretched beneath a canopy of stars, silver moonlight painting the olive groves in shades of dream. Tomorrow the allied families would gather. Tomorrow the war against Leon Bartoli would begin in earnest. Tomorrow, She would stand beside Raphael Montanari and reveal herself to the most powerful men in Italy. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something closer to peace. For 2 years, she had been running, hiding, surviving, but surviving wasn't living. And for the first time since her world had collapsed, Celeste felt the possibility of something more. A knock at her door pulled her from the window. Yes. The door opened. Tommaso stood in the hallway, his scarred face grave. "Miss Fiorentino, you need to come with me." "What's wrong?" "We intercepted a communication from Leone Bartoli's network, addressed specifically to Massimo's handlers." Tommaso's dark eyes met hers. "They know you warned Don Montanari. They know about your intelligence background. And they've issued a contract." Celeste's blood ran cold. "A contract? 3 million euros. To whoever delivers you to Leone Bartoli alive." The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 3 million euros. More money than most people would see in a lifetime. Enough to motivate every mercenary, every criminal, every desperate soul in Italy. "Does Raphael know?" she asked. "He knows. Tommaso hesitated. "He's not taking it well." Of course he wasn't. A contract on someone under his protection was an insult, a challenge, a declaration of war. And Raphael Montanari did not respond well to challenges. "Where is he?" "The study. He's been making calls for the last hour." Celeste moved toward the door. Tommaso stepped aside to let her pass. "Miss Fiorentino," he said as she walked by. "For what it's worth, I've never seen him like this before. Not even when they killed his wife." She paused. "Like what?" "Afraid." Tommaso's scarred face was unreadable. "Not for himself. For you." The words settled into her chest like stones. Then she walked toward the study, toward whatever waited, toward the man who had chosen to protect her. The study door was ajar. Through the gap, Celeste could see Raphael standing behind his desk, his phone pressed to his ear, his tattooed fingers gripping the edge of the wood hard enough to leave marks. "I don't care what it costs. I want every point of access covered, every border crossing, every port. If anyone so much as asks about her, I want to know about it before they finish the sentence." A pause as someone responded on the other end. "Then double the security. Triple it if you have to." His steel-gray eyes caught the lamplight, burning with cold fury. "Leone Bartoli does not get to threaten what is mine." "What is mine?" The possessive weight of those words should have bothered her. Instead, they wrapped around her heart like armor. Raphael ended the call and set the phone down with controlled precision. He looked up. His eyes found hers through the gap in the door. "Come in," he said quietly. Celeste entered, closing the door behind her. The study felt smaller than it had before, more intimate. The mahogany and leather that surrounded them seemed to lean inward, containing them both in a space too small for the emotions that filled it. "Tommaso told me," she said. "He told you about the contract?" "Yes." "Then you know that leaving is not an option." "I know that staying makes me a target painted on your back." Raphael's jaw tightened. "You were already a target. The contract changes nothing except the price. 3 million euros is not nothing. 3 million euros is what I spend on security in a month." His steel-gray eyes held hers. "Bartoli thinks he can use you as leverage. He thinks threatening you will distract me, divide my attention, weaken my position before the meeting tomorrow. He's not wrong. He's completely wrong." Raphael moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. "Because he doesn't understand that protecting you isn't a distraction. It's motivation." "Raphael, every person who takes that contract, every mercenary who comes looking, every threat that emerges from the shadows." His voice dropped to something low and dangerous. "I will destroy them all, without hesitation, without mercy, because you chose to save me when you had nothing to gain, and that debt cannot be repaid by anything less than absolute protection." Celeste's breath caught. "This isn't a debt. Then what is it?" The question hung between them, exposed. demanding an answer she wasn't sure she could give. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know what to call this. But it's not a debt. It's not gratitude. It's not." She trailed off. Raphael's tattooed hand rose to cup her face. "It's not what?" he asked softly. "It's not something I've felt before." His steel-gray eyes searched hers. And then, slowly, the tension in his expression softened. "Neither have I," he admitted. The confession hung between them like a fragile thing. Something new, something tender, something that could shatter at a careless touch. But neither of them was being careless. "Tomorrow," Raphael said quietly, "you will stand beside me in front of the most powerful families in Italy. They will see you. They will know your name. They will understand that anyone who threatens you threatens me. And after tomorrow? After tomorrow, we end Leone Bartoli." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "And then we figure out what this is. Together. Together." The word resonated through her like a struck bell. "I'd like that," Celeste whispered. Raphael's lips curved into something that was almost, finally, a real smile. "Good." He kissed her again. Longer this time, deeper, a promise of things to come. And somewhere in the shadows of the Belladonna estate, the war continued to build. But in that moment, in the amber glow of the study, there was only this: two people who had found each other in the darkness. Two people who refused to let go. Two people who had no idea how high the flames would rise before this was over. At 3 in the morning, the alarms began to scream. Celeste jolted awake in Raphael's study. She had fallen asleep in the leather chair, neither of them willing to separate after the weight of the evening's revelations. Raphael was already on his feet, his beretta in hand, his steel-gray eyes scanning the shadows. "What's happening?" Celeste asked. "Perimeter breach. Eastern wall." The sound of gunfire echoed from somewhere outside. Tommaso's voice crackled through the radio at Raphael's collar. "Multiple contacts. At least 15. They're hitting the secondary entrance hard. Hold them. I'm on my way." "Don Montanari." Tommaso's voice cut off in static. Raphael's jaw tightened. "Stay here," he ordered. "Lock the door behind me." "I'm not staying behind." "Celeste, you need every ally you have. I can help. This isn't analysis. This is a firefight. I've survived worse than firefights." Her hazel eyes met his without flinching. "And if they're here for me, I'd rather face them than hide while others die protecting me." The conflict in Raphael's expression was visible. Duty warring with something deeper, something that had grown between them over these impossible days. "If you get hurt, then I get hurt fighting." She touched his face, the first time she had initiated contact. "I'm not hiding anymore, not even for you." Raphael's steel-gray eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they held resignation, and something like pride. "Stay behind me," he said. "And when this is over, we're having a conversation about your definition of reasonable risk." Despite everything, Celeste almost smiled. "I look forward to it." They moved toward the door together. The estate had become a war zone. 15 attackers, maybe more, had breached the eastern perimeter using explosives and diversionary tactics. They were professionals armed with military-grade weapons, coordinating through encrypted channels. Leone Bartoli's response to the captured intelligence. He had moved faster than anyone expected. Raphael and Celeste emerged into chaos. The hallway lights had been cut, replaced by emergency lighting that cast everything in harsh red shadows. Gunfire echoed from multiple directions. Somewhere, glass shattered. Somewhere else, men shouted orders in Italian and something that sounded like Albanian. Mercenaries. International contractors with no loyalty to anyone but money. The €3 million contract was paying dividends. "This way," Raphael said, pulling Celeste toward the service corridor. They moved through the shadows, avoiding the main hallways where the fighting was heaviest. Tommaso's loyal men were holding barely, but the attackers kept coming. They reached a junction. Raphael pressed himself against the wall, listening. Footsteps. Heavy. Close. Too close. He raised his beretta and waited, The first attacker came around the corner at a run, tactical gear, assault rifle, face hidden behind a balaclava. Raphael's shot took him through the throat before the man could register the threat. The second attacker was right behind him. Raphael fired again. The second man went down. But there was a third, and the third had Celeste in his sights. Time slowed. Celeste saw the muzzle flash before she heard the shot. She saw Raphael's face twist with something that looked like terror. She saw him move, faster than should have been possible, throwing himself between her and the bullet. The impact caught him in the shoulder, spinning him into the wall. Blood bloomed across his white shirt like spreading roses. Celeste screamed his name. The third attacker was still raising his weapon. She didn't think. She moved. Her hand closed around the gun that had fallen from Raphael's grip. She fired. Once, twice, 3 times. The third attacker went down. And then there was silence. Only silence. And the sound of Raphael's labored breathing. "Stay with me," Celeste said, her hands pressing against the wound in his shoulder. "Stay with me. Don't you dare." "I'm fine," Raphael managed. His voice was rough with pain. "It's not fatal. You were shot. I've been shot before. That's not reassuring." He laughed. A short, painful sound that turned into a cough. "Tommaso," he said into his radio. "Sit rep. Static." Then, finally, "Perimeter secured. We lost 4 men, but the attackers are neutralized. Casualties? 12 confirmed dead. 3 captured. The rest fled when they realized they were losing." Raphael's eyes closed briefly. For loyal men. For more deaths on his conscience. "Get a medic to the Eastern Junction," he ordered. "I've been hit. On our way." The radio went silent. Raphael's steel-gray eyes found Celeste's. "You shot him." "I shot him. You said you weren't trained for combat." "I said I was trained to survive." Her hazel eyes glistened. "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have stepped in front of a bullet for you?" "Yes. Too bad." His tattooed hand found hers, sticky with his blood. "I'd do it again." Celeste's breath caught. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Tommaso and the medics arriving. But before they reached the junction, Raphael pulled Celeste closer. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "Whatever happens next, whatever comes from this night, I need you to know something." "What?" His steel-gray eyes held hers. The words carved into his neck seemed to burn in the red emergency light. "El silenzio vince." But for once, silence wasn't enough. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. The words hung between them, impossible, terrifying, true. Celeste's response was swallowed by the arrival of Tommaso and the medics. But her eyes said everything her voice could not. And as they lifted Raphael onto the stretcher, as they rushed him toward the estate's private medical facility, Celeste held onto his bloodied hand and refused to let go. The surgery took 3 hours. Celeste waited outside the operating room, sitting in a plastic chair that was too hard and too small, watching doctors move behind glass that revealed nothing. Tommaso sat beside her. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. At 6 in the morning, the surgeon emerged. "He'll live," she said. "The bullet missed the major arteries. He's lost blood, but he's strong. He'll need rest, but he'll make a full recovery." Celeste's knees nearly gave out. "Can I see him?" "He's asking for you." Of course he was. Raphael looked pale against the hospital sheets, a stark contrast to the olive skin and dark hair she had grown accustomed to. Monitors beeped softly, and 4 dripped clear fluid into his arm. But his steel-gray eyes were open, and they found hers the moment she entered the room. "You stayed," he said. "Where else would I go?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "The meeting is in 12 hours. I need to." "You need to rest," Celeste repeated, her voice steady despite the fear still coiling through her chest. Raphael's steel-gray eyes held hers from the hospital bed, the Roman lion on his right forearm flexing as he tried to push himself upright. The 4-line tugged at his vein, and fresh blood seeped through the bandage on his shoulder, staining the white sheets with spreading crimson. The script at his neck, Il Silenzio Vince, curved above his open collar, dark ink stark against olive skin still pale from blood loss. The meeting is in 12 hours, he said, voice rough with pain and frustration. I cannot afford to rest. You cannot afford to die either. Celeste moved closer, her hazel eyes fierce. Tommaso can handle the preparations. The allied families will wait. They will not wait. Raphael's tattooed knuckles, Honore feed, whitened as he gripped the bed rail. Leone Bartoli just sent mercenaries into my home. He put a €3 million price on your head. Every hour I spend in this bed is an hour he uses to strengthen his position. And every hour you spend bleeding out is an hour closer to giving him exactly what he wants. The words hung between them like a challenge. Raphael's jaw tightened. The cathedral tattoo on his left forearm, black roses and olive branches surrounding ancient stone, seemed to darken as muscle tensed beneath the ink. You shot a man tonight, he said quietly. 3 times. Center mass. Celeste's breath caught. I did what was necessary. You did what most trained soldiers hesitate to do. His steel-gray eyes searched her face. You didn't freeze. You didn't miss. You moved like someone who has done this before. The silence stretched. Celeste looked away, her dark chestnut hair falling around her face like a curtain. Military intelligence isn't always about analysis, she said finally. Sometimes the intelligence you need is behind enemy lines. Sometimes you have to go get it yourself. You were a field operative. I was whatever my country needed me to be. Her hazel eyes met his again, haunted by memories she rarely allowed to surface. Until my country decided I was more useful dead than alive. Raphael absorbed this new information the way he absorbed everything, silently, completely, filing it away for future consideration. Then we are more alike than I realized, he said softly. Before Celeste could respond, the door opened. Tommaso entered, his scarred face grave, his dark suit rumpled from the firefight. Blood that wasn't his own stained his collar. Behind him came Adelina, carrying a fresh tray of bandages and wearing an expression that brooked no argument. The perimeter is secure, Tommaso reported. We've accounted for all the attackers, 12 dead, 3 captured. The rest fled when they realized they were losing. Our losses are 4 confirmed, 2 critical. For men dead, 2 more dying, because of a contract on Celeste's head. She felt the weight of it settle into her bones like lead. The captured ones, Raphael said. What do they know? They're mercenaries, Albanian contractors with no direct connection to Bartoli. He hired them through 3 layers of intermediaries to maintain deniability. Tommaso's scarred expression darkened. But there's something else. Something you need to see. He placed a tablet on the bedside table. The screen showed a hidden surveillance feed from the East Wing, one of Adelina's secret cameras, positioned in a disused storage room that no one had entered in years. Except someone had. The image showed a conspiracy board assembled on the far wall. Photographs connected by red string. Dates circled in black marker. Names written in careful handwriting that Celeste didn't recognize. Raphael's own face was at the center of the board, crossed out with thick black lines. And beside it, Celeste's photograph, taken months ago, during a smaller gathering, while she refilled wine glasses with the mechanical efficiency of someone trying not to be noticed. The caption beneath her image read, Montanari's ghost. Eliminate after extraction. Raphael's expression didn't change, but the cathedral tattoo seemed to darken as blood pulsed beneath it, and his tattooed fingers curled into fists against the sheets. Massimo wasn't the only one, Tommaso said quietly. This board has entries going back 4 years. Someone inside the mansion has been feeding Leone Bartoli information since before. He trailed off, but everyone in the room knew what he meant. Since before the car bomb. Since before Raphael's wife and daughter were murdered. The corruption ran deeper than Massimo's ambition. It meant the attack that had destroyed Raphael's family had been enabled by someone who still walked these halls. Someone who still ate at his table. Someone who had watched him grieve and said nothing. Celeste felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. For years, For years of betrayal hidden in plain sight, Adelina's kind face had gone pale. I vetted every new hire myself. If there is another traitor, we find them before dusk, Raphael cut in. His steel-gray eyes met Celeste's. Together, the next 8 hours passed in a blur of investigation and preparation. Raphael refused to remain in bed, a decision that drove Adelina to frustrated tears and earned him a lecture from the estate's private physician that he completely ignored. He compromised by allowing his shoulder to be properly bandaged and accepting a sling that he removed the moment the doctor left the room. The conspiracy board was photographed, analyzed, and cross-referenced against personnel records going back a decade. Celeste worked beside him, her intelligence training finally unleashed without restraint. She identified patterns in the handwriting that suggested the board's creator was left-handed and educated in northern Italy. She noticed that certain photographs had been taken from angles that only household staff would have access to. She spotted a fingerprint on one of the red strings that Tommaso's men were able to match to the estate's biometric database. The print belonged to Luca Ferrante, senior cook, 12 years of service. The man who had prepared Raphael's meals, attended his celebrations, stood in the kitchen while sensitive conversations drifted through thin walls. The man who had been present the night Raphael's wife mentioned she was taking their daughter to visit her mother in Florence. The trip that ended in fire and screaming metal. When they found Luca, he was in the wine cellar, trying to transmit coordinates of the Allied meeting through an encrypted device hidden behind a false panel. Tommaso's men dragged him into the great hall just as the first guests began to arrive. The Belladonna estate gleamed under restored chandeliers that evening, but the air tasted of gun oil and suspicion. Raphael stood at the center of the great hall in a fresh black Italian suit. The left sleeve deliberately rolled once to keep pressure off his wounded shoulder. The lion on his right forearm caught the light. The cathedral on his left arm curved beneath the fabric. The script at his neck, Il Silenzio Vince, stood stark against olive skin that had regained some of its color. Every tattoo visible, every symbol a warning. Celeste stood at his right hand, no longer in the maid's uniform that had defined her for 3 months. Adelina had provided a tailored charcoal dress that whispered elegance without demanding attention, the kind of clothing that said I belong here without shouting for notice. Her long chestnut hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders. Her hazel eyes scanned every face that entered the hall with the sharp assessment of someone trained to identify threats before they materialized. She looked like what she was, a woman of intelligence and steel, finally allowed to stop pretending. Politicians arrived first. Men in expensive suits who smiled too widely and shook hands too firmly. Then came the judges, their faces carefully neutral, their eyes cataloging everything. Business tycoons followed, checking phones and whispering to assistants. And finally, the heads of the Allied Mafia families. 3 men who controlled territories stretching from Milan to Naples. 3 men whose ancestors had built empires on blood and loyalty. 3 men who had come to the Belladonna estate expecting a strategy session against a common enemy. They had not expected to see the feared Raphael Montanari standing shoulder to shoulder with a woman none of them recognized. Don Caruso of the Milanese family raised an eyebrow. A new advisor, Montanari? A new ally, Raphael corrected. One who has proven herself more valuable than men who have served me for decades. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Celeste felt eyes on her. Some curious, some hostile, some calculating the implications of her presence. In this world, women were wives or mistresses or decorations. They were not advisors. They were not allies. They were certainly not introduced before a gathering of the most powerful men in Italy. Leone Bartoli's absence hung over the room like a living threat. His chair at the negotiating table remained empty, a deliberate insult, a message that said he did not fear this gathering or the man who had called it. But Raphael's steel-gray eyes held no concern. He raised a tattooed hand. Silence fell. "For years ago," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the great hall. "My wife and daughter were murdered by a car bomb ordered by Leone Bartoli." The room went very still. "I swore vengeance. I have spent every day since preparing to deliver it. But tonight," his jaw tightened. Tonight I learned that the order was carried out with help from inside these walls. He gestured toward the enlarged photograph of the conspiracy board now projected on the far wall. The faces, the red string, the dates that stretched back 4 years. His own photograph, crossed out with black marker. Celeste's photograph beside it, marked for elimination. The man who protected me for 11 years is in chains, Raphael continued. But he was not alone. The conspiracy reaches deeper than any of us realized. And if it reaches into the Montanari household, his steel-gray eyes swept the room, then none of your households are safe either. The implication landed like a bomb. If Bartoli could turn men inside Raphael's inner circle, men who had served for over a decade, then he could turn anyone, anywhere. The same rot that had infected the Belladonna estate could be spreading through every family represented in this room. Don Ricci of the Neapolitan family leaned forward. You're saying Bartoli has been building a network of traitors across all our organizations? I'm saying he's been planning this for years. Patient, methodical, waiting for the right moment to strike. Raphael's tattooed fingers curled at his sides. The attack on my estate last night was not a random assault. It was a surgical strike designed to eliminate specific targets. Myself and the woman beside me. Every eye in the room turned to Celeste. She met their gazes without flinching. This woman warned me of the betrayal at the charity gala, Raphael continued. She mapped the conspiracy while disguised as a maid. She took a bullet's path meant for me and killed the man who fired it. Her name is Celeste Fiorentino, and she is the reason I am still breathing. The words hung in the air. A judge in the front row leaned forward, skepticism plain on his face. A maid, an intelligence analyst, Raphael corrected, who once brought down half a corrupt directorate within the Italian government. She was hunted for exposing the truth. She came to my household seeking invisibility, and instead, she chose to save a man the world calls a monster. His steel-gray eyes met hers. That kind of loyalty is rarer than blood. Celeste felt warmth spread through her chest despite the tension in the room. The declaration was more than an introduction, it was a claim. A statement of value that elevated her from servant to equal in the span of a single sentence. In Raphael's world, words were weapons. And he had just armed her with the most powerful weapon of all. Recognition. Before anyone could respond, the main doors burst open. 3 of Tommaso's men dragged a struggling figure into the hall. Luca Ferrante, the senior cook. His white apron was stained with more than kitchen grease. Blood from a fresh split lip dripped onto the marble floor, leaving a trail of crimson that seemed to point directly at Raphael. Tommaso stepped forward, his scarred face grim. We found him in the wine cellar, trying to transmit the coordinates of this meeting through an encrypted device. The conspiracy board, he gestured toward the projected image, has his handwriting. He's been feeding information to Bartoli for 4 years. Luca's eyes darted around the room, wild with fear and defiance. They landed on Celeste. Hatred flashed across his face. Pure, undisguised, burning. She was supposed to die with you, he spat. At the gala, Massimo was going to handle both of you, and then Bartoli would have paid us enough to disappear forever. But she ruined everything. His voice rose. She ruined everything. She was supposed to be invisible. She was supposed to be no one. But she kept watching, kept listening, kept. Enough. Raphael's voice cut through the tirade like a blade. His steel-gray eyes were cold enough to freeze blood. You fed information to Leone Bartoli for 4 years. You helped him plan the murder of my wife and daughter. You stood in my kitchen and prepared my meals while plotting my destruction. Luca's defiance wavered. I was promised territory, protection. Bartoli said the Montanari Empire was dying, and if I helped him accelerate the process, you would rise with the new order. Raphael's tattooed hands curled into fists. And my family would burn. The old woman helped me. Luca's finger shot toward Adelina, who stood near the service door with silver hair and a face that had gone very still. She passed messages for me. She met with Bartoli's man last month. Ask her. Ask her what she knows. Every eye in the room turned to Adelina Romano, the elderly housekeeper who had served the Montanari family for 43 years. The woman who had held Raphael when his mother died. The woman who had helped Celeste navigate the first weeks of her hidden life at the estate. Adelina's kind face was carved with quiet dignity as she met Raphael's gaze without flinching. "I fed information," she said softly. "But not to Bartoli." The room held its breath. "I fed it to Celeste." The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Adelina stepped forward, her silver hair catching the chandelier light, her black dress pressed and proper despite the chaos of the night. "I suspected something was wrong in this house for months before Celeste arrived," she continued. "Small things. Messages delivered at odd hours, guards who changed shifts without explanation, conversations that stopped whenever I entered a room. I knew there was a conspiracy, but I couldn't prove it. I couldn't trust anyone enough to share my suspicions." Her kind eyes found Celeste's. "Then you came, quiet, watchful, asking no questions but seeing everything. I recognized what you were within the first week. Not a maid seeking employment, but a woman seeking refuge. Someone trained to observe. Someone who would notice what others missed." Celeste's breath caught. "I left notes in the linen closet," Adelina said. "Guard rotations, suspicious meetings, names of men who received packages they never opened in front of others. I gave you everything I knew, hoping you would piece together what I could not." She turned to face Raphael directly. "When Luca claims I met with Bartoli's man, he speaks of an old contact from my youth, a man who once worked for rival families before retiring to obscurity. I met with him to confirm the price on Celeste's head so I could warn her. So I could protect her." Her voice cracked slightly. "I have served this family for 43 years, Don Montanari. I held your mother's hand when she died. I held you when your daughter was buried. I would rather burn than see this house fall to serpents." Raphael's steel-gray eyes studied the woman who had been a constant presence throughout his entire life. The woman who had sung him to sleep when nightmares came. The woman who had taught him to tie his shoes, to read Latin, to appreciate wine. The woman who had stood vigil outside his bedroom door for 3 days after his wife's funeral, ensuring he ate, ensuring he slept, ensuring he survived when survival felt impossible. His tattooed fingers uncurled slowly. "Luca," he said, voice quiet and deadly. "You claim Adelina passed messages for you. Describe them." Luca's face twisted with confusion. She left notes in the wine cellar, behind the third rack. I collected them and..." "What did they say?" "Guard positions, meeting times, information about Celeste." Raphael's eyes never left Adelina. "You left notes in the wine cellar?" "Never." Adelina's voice was steady. "I left them in the linen closet, third shelf, behind the winter blankets." Raphael turned back to Luca. "Someone left notes in the wine cellar. Someone who knew about the conspiracy. Someone who wanted you to believe Adelina was your ally." The implication settled over the room. There was a third conspirator. Someone who had been playing both sides, feeding information to Bartoli while framing Adelina to take the fall if the conspiracy was discovered. Someone who was still in this room. Raphael's steel-gray eyes swept the assembly. Politicians, judges, business tycoons, allied family heads, staff, guards. The traitor could be anyone. "Tommaso," he said quietly, "lock the doors." The next hour was the longest of Celeste's life. Raphael conducted the investigation with ruthless efficiency, questioning each person in the room with the practiced skill of someone who had spent decades reading lies. His tattooed hands remained loose at his sides, but his eyes missed nothing. Every flicker of fear, every hesitation, every glance that lingered too long. Celeste worked beside him, her analytical mind dissecting responses, identifying inconsistencies, building a profile of the hidden traitor. The third conspirator was intelligent enough to plant evidence against Adelina. They had access to the wine cellar, which meant they were either staff or had arranged for staff to assist them. They knew enough about the conspiracy to leave convincing messages, but they hadn't been identified by Massimo or Luca, which meant they operated independently. They were patient, methodical, comfortable hiding in plain sight, just like she had been. The realization struck her with cold clarity. She leaned toward Raphael, pitching her voice low enough that only he could hear. The third conspirator isn't staff. They're someone who visits regularly but isn't subject to the same scrutiny. Someone trusted implicitly. Someone who would have access to private areas without raising suspicion. Raphael's steel-gray eyes narrowed. Someone like a judge, Celeste continued, or a politician, or... Her gaze swept the room, landed on a face she had seen a dozen times during her 3 months at the estate. A face that had always been present at gatherings, always positioned near doorways, always watching without appearing to watch. A face that belonged to the personal physician who had treated Raphael's shoulder. Dr. Enzo Martelli, the man who had unrestricted access to the estate. The man who had been present when Raphael's wife announced her travel plans 4 years ago. The man who was currently standing near the service door, his hand drifting toward his coat pocket with subtle urgency. The doctor, Celeste breathed. Raphael's head turned. Their eyes met across the room, steel gray locking onto pale blue. And in that moment, Dr. Martelli knew he had been discovered. Everything happened at once. Martelli's hand came out of his pocket holding a small pistol, the kind that could be concealed during medical examinations, the kind that killed with quiet efficiency. He raised it toward Raphael. Celeste moved without thinking. Her body slammed into Raphael's wounded shoulder, driving them both to the ground as the bullet passed through the space where his head had been a heartbeat earlier. Screams erupted. Guests scattered. Tommaso's men surged toward the doctor, but Martelli was already running. Not toward the main doors, but toward the service entrance that led to the kitchen and beyond. He knew the estate's layout as well as anyone. He had been planning this escape for years. Raphael pushed himself up, ignoring the fresh blood seeping through his bandage. His steel-gray eyes tracked Martelli's fleeing form. "He cannot reach the perimeter," he growled. "If he escapes, he warns Bartoli that we know everything." "I'll go," Celeste said. "Celeste, I know the service corridors better than your men. I've been mapping them for 3 months. Her hazel eyes met his without flinching. "Trust me." The word hung between them. Trust. The foundation everything else had been built upon. Raphael's jaw tightened. Then he nodded once. "Go." Celeste ran through the service corridors like she was born to them. Her feet knew every turn, every shortcut, every shadow. 3 months of invisibility had taught her the hidden architecture of the Belladonna estate. The passages that connected kitchens to dining halls, the staircases that servants used to move unseen, the doors that led to places guests never knew existed. Martelli had a head start, but he didn't have her knowledge. She caught up to him in the wine cellar. He was struggling with the hidden panel, the same secret exit that had started everything, the back door that Massimo's men had tried to use for their ambush. "Dr. Martelli." Her voice echoed through the stone chamber. The physician spun, pistol raised. But Celeste had already moved. The disarm technique was one she had learned in her 2nd year of field training. A twist of the wrist, a shift of weight, a precise strike that sent the weapon skittering across the floor. Martelli stumbled backward, shock written across his face. You're just a maid." "I was never just a maid." Celeste advanced on him, her hazel eyes cold with the focus of someone who had spent years in the shadows of dangerous men. 4 years ago, you were present when Raphael's wife mentioned her travel plans. You passed that information to Leone Bartoli. You helped murder a woman and a child. Martelli's pale blue eyes widened. I had no choice. Everyone has a choice." Celeste's voice was quiet and lethal. "You chose power over loyalty. You chose money over honor. You chose to destroy a family that trusted you. Bartoli would have killed me if I refused. Then you should have chosen death." She struck. The blow caught Martelli in the throat, dropping him to his knees. Before he could recover, Tommaso's men poured into the cellar, surrounding the fallen physician with weapons drawn. Celeste stepped back, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the release of fury she had been carrying since she first realized what Martelli had done. "Take him," she said quietly. "Don Montanari will want to question him personally." The Great Hall had descended into controlled chaos. Politicians demanded explanations. Judges threatened investigations. The allied family heads conferred in tight clusters, their expressions ranging from shock to cold calculation. Raphael stood at the center of it all, his wounded shoulder forgotten, his tattooed hands steady despite the blood seeping through his bandage. When Celeste entered with Tommaso's men dragging Martelli between them, he turned. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Something passed between them, relief, pride, the beginning of something neither had words for yet. "The third conspirator," Celeste said simply. "Dr. Enzo Martelli. He's been passing information to Leone Bartoli for 4 years. He was present when your wife announced her travel plans." The room went silent. Raphael's steel-gray eyes turned to the man who had treated his injuries, attended his celebrations, stood at his bedside and pretended to care whether he lived or died. "Enzo." His voice was soft, deadly. "You were my physician for 15 years. You delivered my daughter. You held my hand when my wife's body was pulled from the wreckage." His tattooed fingers curled into fists. "And the entire time, you were feeding information to the man who murdered them." Martelli's pale face had gone gray with fear. "Don Montanari, Raphael. You must understand. I understand everything." Raphael moved forward, his tall frame casting a shadow over the kneeling physician. "You will tell me every piece of information you have ever shared with Leone Bartoli. Every conversation, every detail, every vulnerability you helped him exploit. And if I refuse?" Raphael's smile was thin as a blade's edge. "Then I will demonstrate exactly why my enemies call me the Devil of Tuscany." He gestured to Tommaso. "Take him to the cellar. We'll continue this conversation in private." As Martelli was dragged away, Raphael turned to face the assembled families. His steel-gray eyes swept the room with cold authority. "Tonight you have witnessed the depth of Leone Bartoli's conspiracy. 4 years of infiltration. 3 traitors within my own household. Countless opportunities to destroy everything I have built." He paused. "But I am still standing. And by sunrise, Leone Bartoli will understand exactly what that means." Don Caruso stepped forward. "What do you propose?" "A coordinated strike. Simultaneous attacks on Bartoli's operations across 6 territories. We use the intelligence we've gathered, the communications, the schedules, the vulnerabilities, to dismantle his network before he can regroup." "And the woman?" Don Ricci's eyes cut toward Celeste. "The former government analyst? What role does she play in this?" Raphael's tattooed hand found Celeste's. "She plays whatever role she chooses. She has earned the right to stand beside any of us, and she has proven herself more capable than most of the men in this room." The declaration hung in the air. Celeste felt the weight of every gaze in the hall. Some approving, some skeptical, some calculating the implications of a woman elevated to such status. But she also felt Raphael's hand in hers. Warm, steady. A promise of protection that extended far beyond physical safety. She squeezed his fingers gently. "I'll help with the intelligence analysis," she said, addressing the assembled families directly. "I'll identify the weak points in Bartoli's operations and help coordinate the timing of the strikes. But the military decisions belong to you." Don Caruso nodded slowly. "Acceptable. Then we begin," Raphael said. "Tonight we plan. Tomorrow we strike. And by the end of the week, Leone Bartoli will understand the price of threatening what is mine." The planning session lasted until dawn. Maps were unrolled across the great table. Intelligence reports were analyzed. Strike teams were assigned. Timing was debated, refined, finalized. Celeste worked beside Raphael throughout, her analytical mind proving invaluable. She identified 3 weak points in Bartoli's southern operations that only someone with her intelligence background could have spotted. She predicted the likely response patterns of his security forces. She suggested contingencies that the allied families had never considered. By the time the sun rose over the Tuscan hills, they had a plan. A coordinated assault on 6 territories. Simultaneous strikes that would cripple Bartoli's organization before he could react. The beginning of the end. Raphael walked Celeste to her quarters as the first light touched the windows. His wounded shoulder ached. His body demanded rest. But his steel-gray eyes held only her. "You were extraordinary tonight," he said quietly. "I did what needed to be done. You did more than that." He stopped in the corridor, turning to face her. "You saved my life. Again. You exposed traitors I had trusted for years. You proved yourself before the most powerful families in Italy." His tattooed hand rose to cup her face. "And you made me believe that trust is still possible in a world built on betrayal." Celeste's breath caught. "Raphael, I meant what I said in the infirmary." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I'm falling in love with you, Celeste. Not because you saved me. Not because you're useful or valuable or strategically important. Because you see the man beneath the monster and still choose to stand here." Her hazel eyes glistened. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. "Despite everything I know about your world. Despite everything I've seen. Despite every instinct telling me that this is dangerous. Everything in my world is dangerous. I know." A faint smile touched her lips. "But you're worth the risk." His steel-gray eyes softened with something vulnerable. Something she suspected he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He leaned forward. Their lips met. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, questioning, 2 people learning each other's boundaries. Then it deepened, became something fiercer, more urgent. A release of tension that had been building since the night a quiet maid whispered 7 impossible words. When they finally separated, Raphael's forehead rested against hers. "When this is over," he breathed, "I want more than stolen moments in corridors." "So do I." "Good." He kissed her again, briefer this time but no less significant. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow the war begins in earnest. I need you sharp. And you. I need to question Martelli." His steel-gray eyes hardened. "He has information about my wife's murder that I have waited 4 years to hear." Celeste touched his face gently. "Don't let the darkness consume you." "I won't." His tattooed fingers covered hers. "Not anymore. Not with you here to remind me what light looks like." The first strikes landed 3 days later. Raphael's forces, bolstered by the allied families, hit Bartoli's warehouses simultaneously across Tuscany. Explosions lit the night sky. Gunfire echoed through industrial districts. Men who had sworn loyalty to Leone Bartoli found themselves surrounded by enemies they hadn't seen coming. Tommaso led one assault team himself, his scarred face pale against soot-streaked skin. He took a bullet to the side during a firefight at a harbor facility. Critical but not fatal, according to the field medics who extracted him. Celeste received the news in the Belladonna's restored command center, where she had spent the last 72 hours coordinating intelligence and tracking enemy movements. "He'll survive," Raphael said, appearing at her shoulder. His own wound had mostly healed, though he still moved with careful deliberation that spoke of lingering pain. "Tommaso has survived worse." "I know." She turned to face him, hazel eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "But it doesn't make it easier. Nothing about war is easy." He pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest while the command center buzzed with activity around them. "The southern operations are neutralized," he said quietly. "The harbor facility is ours. Bartoli's communication network is in chaos." "And Bartoli himself?" Raphael's jaw tightened. "Still alive, still protected, surrounded by what remains of his loyal forces at his compound outside Siena." "Then this isn't over." "Not yet." His steel-gray eyes met hers. "But it will be soon." The war continued for another week. Territory by territory, operation by operation, Leone Bartoli's empire crumbled. The intelligence Celeste had gathered, combined with the confessions extracted from Massimo, Luca, and Martelli, provided a detailed map of every weakness in Bartoli's organization. The allied families struck those weaknesses with surgical precision. By the end of the 7th day, Bartoli controlled nothing beyond the walls of his own compound. But those walls were formidable. The compound outside Siena had been built to withstand sieges. Stone walls, armed guards, defensive positions that had been prepared for exactly this scenario. Breaking through would cost lives. Perhaps too many lives. The allied families counseled patience. Wait for Bartoli's resources to run out. Starve him into surrender. Let time do what force could not. But Raphael remembered the car bomb. He remembered his wife's scream, cut short by fire. He remembered his daughter's small body, wrapped in white linen, lowered into cold earth. He had waited 4 years for justice. He would not wait another day. Celeste found him in the library at midnight. He stood before the Eastern bookcase, the one that concealed the passage that had saved both their lives. His back to the door, his tattooed arms visible where he had rolled his sleeves. The lion, the cathedral, the script at his neck. Every symbol of everything he had built and nearly lost. "You're planning to go yourself," Celeste said quietly. Raphael didn't turn. "Bartoli killed my family. I owe it to them to end this personally. You owe it to them to survive." She moved closer, stopping beside him. "Going alone into a fortified compound is suicide. I won't be alone. Tommaso is recovering. He's insisting on leading the assault team despite his injuries. Tommaso can barely walk. He's walked on worse." Finally, Raphael turned to face her. His steel-gray eyes held the weight of 4 years of grief. "This ends tomorrow, Celeste. One way or another. I need to be there when it does. Then I'm coming with you." "No, I'm not asking permission." His tattooed hands caught her shoulders. "Celeste, listen to me. Leon Bartoli has a €3 million contract on your head. If you walk into that compound, every mercenary still loyal to him will be targeting you specifically. I cannot protect you and lead an assault at the same time. Then don't protect me." Her hazel eyes flashed. "I protected myself for 2 years before I ever met you. I survived government assassins and corrupt intelligence officers and men far more dangerous than Leon Bartoli's hired guns. I don't need you to shield me. I need you to trust me." The word echoed between them. Trust, the foundation of everything they had built. Raphael's grip on her shoulders softened. "I do trust you," he said quietly. "More than I've trusted anyone since my wife died. But the thought of losing you is exactly how I feel about losing you." She reached up, touching his face. "We do this together, Raphael. We end this together. Or we don't do it at all." The conflict in his expression was visible. Duty warring with love, caution warring with need. Finally, slowly, he nodded. "Together," he agreed. "Together." The assault on Bartoli's compound began at dawn. 40 hand-picked men, the best from Raphael's remaining forces and the allied families, armed with the finest weapons money could buy and intelligence that mapped every defensive position. Raphael led from the front, dressed in a dark wool overcoat that flared like a cape, his tattoos visible beneath rolled sleeves. His beretta was in his hand. His steel-gray eyes were cold with purpose. Celeste moved beside him, armed with a weapon Tommaso had provided and training that had never quite left her body. The outer walls fell within minutes. Explosives breached the main gate. Assault teams poured through. Bartoli's remaining guards, demoralized by weeks of defeat, fought with desperation rather than discipline. They fell anyway, room by room, corridor by corridor. The compound was cleared, until only the central chamber remained. Leon Bartoli waited for them in a room that looked like it belonged in a museum. Renaissance paintings on the walls, antique furniture arranged with careful precision. A massive desk carved from what looked like a single piece of mahogany. He stood behind that desk, salt and pepper hair immaculate despite the chaos around him. Cold green eyes watching the door with the patience of a man who had already accepted his fate. Behind him, 2 armed guards. In front of him, a woman. Celeste's heart stopped. The woman was young, early 20s, perhaps. Dark hair, terrified eyes, a gag in her mouth and rope binding her wrists. One of the household staff who had been captured during the initial assault. A hostage. Raphael Montanari, Bartoli said. His voice calm despite the weapons pointed at him. I've been waiting for you. Raphael's steel-gray eyes never left Bartoli's face. You've lost, Leon. Your organization is destroyed. Your allies have abandoned you. Every piece of intelligence you thought was secret has been used against you. And yet I'm still breathing. Bartoli's smile was thin. Which means there's still room for negotiation. There is no negotiation. There is only justice. Justice. Bartoli laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. You speak of justice while standing on the bodies of men you've killed. You speak of justice while your empire is built on the same foundations as mine. Blood, fear, and the willingness to do what others will not. Perhaps. Raphael's tattooed hands tightened on his weapon. But I never murdered children. The words hung in the air like a sentence. Bartoli's expression flickered. Your daughter. That was regrettable. Collateral damage in a larger. Say her name. Raphael's voice was quiet. Deadly. Say my daughter's name. Bartoli hesitated. I don't. You don't know it. Something cold and terrible moved behind Raphael's steel-gray eyes. You ordered her death, and you don't even know her name. She was 6 years old. Her name was Isabella, and the last thing she ever saw was fire. The gun in his hand rose. Wait. Bartoli's composure cracked. The girl, the hostage. If you shoot me, my men will. Your men are dead. Celeste's voice cut through the tension. She had moved while Bartoli was focused on Raphael, circling toward the guards with the silent efficiency of someone trained in exactly this kind of operation. The guards hadn't noticed, until it was too late. 2 shots. Both guards fell. The hostage screamed behind her gag. Terrified but unharmed. Bartoli stood alone. No protection. No leverage. Just an old man with cold green eyes and blood on his hands that would never wash clean. Raphael advanced. For years, he said quietly. For years I have waited for this moment. For years I have dreamed of watching the light leave your eyes. Then do it. Bartoli's voice had lost its polish, stripped down to something raw and desperate. End it. Prove that you're exactly the monster everyone says you are. Raphael's tattooed finger tightened on the trigger. The lion on his forearm seemed to roar. The cathedral seemed to darken. The words at his neck, Il Silenzio Vince, burned like a brand. 1 bullet. 1 moment. 1 execution. Justice. Celeste touched his arm. Raphael. Her voice was soft, calm. He didn't turn, but his steel-gray eyes flickered toward her. He deserves death, she said simply. But death is not justice. Death is escape. It's silence. It's the end of consequences. Her hazel eyes met his. Justice is making him face what he's done. Justice is putting him before the families he's betrayed, the men he's murdered, the children he's orphaned. Justice is letting the world see him for what he truly is. Not a powerful man, but a coward who killed a little girl because he was afraid of her father. The words settled into the silence. Raphael's jaw tightened. His finger remained on the trigger. For a long, terrible moment, it seemed like he would pull it anyway. Then, slowly, the barrel lowered. Tommaso. His voice was rough. Take him. He faces the families. They decide his fate. Bartoli's face went pale. No, you can't. The families will. The families will give you exactly what you deserve. Raphael turned away, his steel-gray eyes finding Celeste's. Something had shifted in his expression. The cold fury replaced by something more complicated. Something that looked almost like peace. You were right, he said quietly. Death would have been too easy. I know. She took his hand, tattooed fingers intertwining with hers. Let's go home. The trial of Leon Bartoli lasted 3 days. Every allied family sent representatives. Every victim was named. Every crime was catalogued and presented in meticulous detail. Celeste's intelligence work formed the backbone of the prosecution. The documents she had gathered, the communications she had intercepted, the patterns she had identified, All of it painted a picture of a man who had built his empire on the suffering of others. On the third day, the families delivered their verdict. Leone Bartoli was stripped of all titles, territories, and protections. He was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in a prison controlled by the Allied families. A place where no rescue would ever come, where no bribe would ever work, where he would live out his remaining years in the knowledge of everything he had lost. It was worse than death. And Raphael watched it happen with steel-gray eyes that held, finally, something like closure. The restoration of the Montanari estate took another month. Walls were repaired. Security was rebuilt. The loyal staff who had survived the chaos were honored, compensated, and given positions of trust within the new order. Adelina was named head of household, a title that carried authority beyond anything she had held before. She accepted it with quiet dignity and immediately began reorganizing the estate with an efficiency that left everyone slightly terrified. Tommaso recovered from his injuries and returned to active duty, his scar joined by new ones that he wore like medals. And Celeste stayed, not as a maid, not as a servant, as something else entirely. Raphael gave her quarters in the family wing. Rooms that had once belonged to his wife, now emptied of ghosts and filled with the possibility of new beginnings. He gave her access to his intelligence operations, valuing her analytical mind as much as her bravery. He gave her his trust, his respect, his protection. And slowly, carefully, he gave her his heart. The wedding took place on a Tuscan evening 3 months after Bartoli's trial. Not a grand ceremony with hundreds of guests and political implications. Something smaller, something real. The restored gardens of the Belladonna estate glowed with candlelight as the sun set over olive groves and rolling hills. A small gathering of witnesses. Tommaso, Adelina, the loyal household staff, representatives from the Allied families, stood in a semicircle around a simple altar covered in white flowers. Raphael waited in a black suit that made his tattoos stand out like declarations. The lion, the cathedral, the script at his neck, honore feed across his knuckles. Every symbol of the man he had been and the man he was becoming. When Celeste appeared at the edge of the garden, his steel-gray eyes softened with something that might have been tears in another man. She wore a simple ivory gown, elegant but understated, the kind of dress that didn't demand attention because she didn't need to. Her dark chestnut hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders. Her hazel eyes held only him. She walked toward the altar without hesitation, without fear, without the weight of the past that had driven her into hiding. Because she wasn't hiding anymore. She was home. The vows they exchanged were simple. No elaborate poetry. No rehearsed declarations. Just truth. I spent my whole life building walls, Raphael said, his tattooed hand holding hers. I believed that strength meant standing alone. That trust was weakness. That love was a liability that could be used against me. His steel-gray eyes glistened. Then a maid whispered 7 words that changed everything. She saw through my walls. She saved my life. She reminded me that the strongest thing a man can do is let someone in. His thumb traced the line of her palm. I vow to let you in, to trust you with everything I am, to protect you not because you need protection, but because you deserve someone who will stand beside you through any darkness. Celeste's breath caught. I spent 2 years running, she said. Hiding, surviving. I convinced myself that invisibility was safety, that if no one saw me, no one could hurt me. Her hazel eyes held his. Then I saw you grieving at 3 in the morning. I saw the man beneath the monster. I saw someone worth risking everything for. A tear slipped down her cheek. I vow to see you, not the Don, not the devil of Tuscany, but the man who loves deeply and loses terribly and fights for the people he cares about. I vow to stand beside you in shadows and in light, to remind you that silence may prevail, but love speaks louder. The words hung between them like sacred things. Tommaso cleared his throat. Adelina wiped her eyes. And Raphael Montanari, the most feared Mafia boss in Italy, the man whose name made grown men tremble, leaned forward and kissed his wife with a tenderness that belied everything the world believed about him. The reception lasted until dawn. Wine flowed. Music played. The loyal staff who had survived the chaos danced and laughed and celebrated the new beginning that none of them had expected. Tommaso gave a toast that made everyone cry. Adelina gave a speech that made everyone laugh. And through it all, Raphael and Celeste stood together, his tattooed arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder, watching the people they loved celebrate the future they had built from the ashes of betrayal. As the first light touched the Tuscan hills, they slipped away from the celebration. They walked through the olive grove where mercenaries had once hunted them. Now peaceful, fragrant with night-blooming jasmine. They passed the hidden entrance to the passage that had saved their lives. Now sealed, its purpose fulfilled. They reached a small clearing where ancient olive trees framed a view of the valley below. And they stood together, watching the sunrise paint the world in shades of gold and possibility. 1 year ago, Celeste said quietly, I was invisible. I was no one. I was surviving, but I wasn't living. And now, she turned to face him, hazel eyes soft with love. Now I'm the woman who saved the most feared mafia boss in Italy. A smile touched her lips. And somehow, against all logic, he loves me back. Raphael's steel-gray eyes held hers. He does, he agreed. Completely, terrifyingly, without reservation. He pulled her close, his tattooed hands cradling her face. You were never invisible, Celeste. You were the bravest person in every room you entered. You just hadn't found someone who knew how to see you yet. She kissed him then, slow, deep, full of promise. When they separated, the sun had fully risen. A new day, a new beginning, a new chapter in a story that had started with 7 whispered words and ended with a love that neither of them had believed was possible. The Belladonna estate rose from the Tuscan hills like a monument to survival. Within its walls, a mafia boss who had learned to trust again ruled with both iron and compassion. Beside him, a woman who had been invisible became the most trusted advisor in Italy. Together, they protected those who needed protection. They punished those who deserved punishment. They built something stronger than the empires that had come before. And on quiet evenings, when the world slowed down enough to breathe, they sat together in the library where everything had changed. 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and refused to let go. The most feared mafia boss in Italy had been wrong about where the danger lay. The greatest gift had been standing only a few feet behind him all along. And now she stood at his side, seen, cherished, forever. El silenzio vince. Silence prevails. But love speaks louder. The end.